Thank you all so much for joining. My name is Sarah Backley, and I'm Associate Director at the British Chamber of Commerce here in Japan. Thank you once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be a full, insightful, hopefully useful, lots of fulls, 60-minute session on the topic of mental health and well-being. For a little bit of context as to why we're holding this event today, as many of you on the call at the event today will know, Laurie Henderson, our Executive Director, returned from maternity leave about 2-3 months ago now. And we were thinking about what the key themes should be for this year's events calendar. And at the Chamber, our main focus is always membership engagement. We are always looking for what you are thinking and what kind of information and support we can offer you that would be most beneficial. So after speaking with many of you, what was really clear to us is that what is on your mind is the recent shift in working environment. 18 months in now, I believe, 19 months in, people have been adapting and getting used to operating remotely, including us at the BCCJ, and really just trying to find a system and a balance that works for you. And 18 months in, this is still very much a challenge. Companies are continuing to reassess their HR policies. Many employers are looking to strike that perfect balance that works for them and their teams. And hopefully, as heads start to turn towards a post-pandemic environment, people are starting to think about what the return to the office will realistically look like. There's still a lot of uncertainty, of course, but we hope to be able to provide some support around this. And so with this, we are launching our brand new event series entitled Future of Work, Building Back Better. This will focus on a post-COVID recovery and really just the wellness of our people and places. And throughout this series, throughout the year, we'll be inviting representatives of BCCJ members and guests to review the trends and explore what this new working environment could look like for you. So to kickstart this series today, it seemed obvious to us that we should start with the topic of mental health and well-being. I mean, it's no secret that the pandemic has had a severe impact on both our psychological and physiological health. And we've invited some really knowledgeable speakers today, who I think you can probably already see the faces of, and I'm sure you may have seen in the event description, to talk about some of the key challenges that this pandemic has had on both our leaders and our employees. And they'll offer some really practical solutions to help create a healthier and happier workplace for you in the post-COVID era. This event is being recorded, but please feel free to send in your questions anonymously using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, and our panelists will do their best to get to these within the allotted time. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, facilitator for this event today, Joshua Bryan, who's the Director of the Financial Services, Legal, HR and Support Division at Robert Walters Japan, who also serves as a board member at TELL Japan. Joshua, if I could pass over to you to introduce our two lovely speakers and today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you to yourself and Laurie and Sam from the BCCJ to invite me to take part today. It's great to be here with the speakers. I'm really looking forward to today's session. We do have a packed agenda, so we'll crack on. Let me introduce Vickie Skorji. She's originally from Australia and is the Lifeline Director at TELL Japan, a local NPO which has been serving the mental health needs of the global community for close to 50 years. Vickie has a master's in counseling and specialist training in neuropsychology. Also, we have Karen Wellbeing here, who's originally from Germany and has worked in Europe, the US, and Asia. She is COO at K Group, where she works with Japanese and global organizations to develop their current and future business leaders, increasingly with young leaders and women. Just a couple of housekeeping points. As we begin our conversation, if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A function. and there'll be an opportunity for some answers at the end of today's session. So, with regards to mental health and well-being, before the pandemic, a lot wasn't perfect. This pandemic has been extremely challenging, and with those challenges has come growth for many, and disruption thrown up by the pandemic may offer many more opportunities for us as leaders and employers to make further improvements. Today, with our experts, we will begin by reviewing where we've come from, what are the mental health realities before and during this pandemic, how the pandemic has challenged and affected leaders, and what's expected of those leaders, and how it's impacted employees, and moving forward, what challenges we will likely face. Hopefully, we're going to learn some practical ideas to ensure a happy, productive, and people-first set of businesses that can weather what's ahead. So to begin with, let's review where we've come from. Vickie, perhaps you could talk us through from your perspective, what were the mental health realities during or before the pandemic?
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you, Laurie, for having us at this session today, and for starting off your Future of Work series looking at the mental health issues, because I think that one of the things that's come out of COVID is how much we've all been impacted by our mental health. So before we think about the changes that we might need going forward, let's have a look at what mental health was like in the workplace prior to COVID. So if I could have the first slide, please. Thank you. So when we think about mental health and we think about it in Japan, we already had quite a significant amount of stress that was going on. And the stress that was experienced in the workplace was so great that in 2015, the Japanese government made it mandatory for every company to start doing annual stress checks. And that was because the majority of people were experiencing stress and worry about their workload, about their work environment, just in the day-to-day functioning of work in Japan. And when we think about that, we also know that prior to COVID, we were witnessing an increase in the number of mental health issues, particularly among younger generations. So I think it's also important to think about, when we think about mental health issues, 75% of them will have their onset before we're 24. And we're seeing a huge increase, or we were seeing a huge increase in the number of young people, particularly in their 20s to 24, that were having ongoing mental health issues. So when you think about that, that's your university students and that's your new grads. So it's important to remember that this group was already experiencing mental health issues. It's also really important to remember that prior to the pandemic, 1 in 5 people in the workplace were struggling with a mental health issue. So it's not something that was new. It's not something that was only a few people were experiencing. We were seeing large suicide rates in Japan. And over here we can see on the right-hand side, I've got a study from the London School of Economics, where they were just showing what the cost of the absenteeism and what it was costing workplaces with depression and anxiety. So I think it's really important that this was already an issue, and it was already an issue that we were seeing increasing within the younger population. So can I have the next slide, please? So then we add a pandemic, and we add it not just to it's something that's happening in Japan, but it's something that's happened globally. And I think also when we think about a pandemic, it's important, or a disaster, it's important to think about that COVID is a little bit different from some of the other disasters that we might have experienced. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about what happens in a disaster and how it impacts us psychologically. And then I'll go back and talk to you a little bit about how people have been experiencing with COVID. So one of the things that we know in a disaster is that a disaster comes along and it makes you have to have a change in your environment without any choice or decisions in it. And that is very stressful. And that adjustment period is quite challenging. And the more that you are impacted by that disaster, so the closer it is to you, the more that you're going to experience the trauma of it or the impact of it. So if you like, it's a bit like that, a cultural adjustment that we might have when we move from one country to another, but sometimes we have choices in that. In a disaster, we have no choice. And so people are struggling to deal with all of those stresses, and that's called a traumatic stress response. And post a disaster, we know that a large number of people are going to have what's called PTSD, a traumatic stress response, around 15 to 20%. But we aren't post anything at the moment. We're still in it, and we're hopeful that within the next 6 months, we might come out of that phase. So how do people experiencing a global pandemic deal with it? Well, we know that initially people were quite stressed in having to work from home. And we can see some of the research that's come out that was saying that employees felt that it was the most stressful event that they had ever encountered, and that many felt that their companies could have been doing more. And as I was saying to you earlier, younger people were experiencing it in greater levels. And also we know that it had impacted women more than it was doing impacting males at this point. And that is because the women were having to share with their family members, with education. Many of their jobs were restricted. So there was a huge impact on women in their general lives, as well as what was going on with them in with the pandemic as well. So when we think about what the future is going to look like, I think it's really important that we have to say we're in a period of transition where all of this change and stresses have been placed on all of us, and that many of us are experiencing almost burnout at the moment, and that our mental health was not in a good place in the first place. So hopefully that helps set the scene about what we know about disasters and what we know about mental health in the workplace. I'll hand it back to you, Joshua.
That's great. Thank you so much, Vickie. Yes. Now let's move on to consider how the pandemic has affected leaders. Karen, perhaps in the past, mental health matters might have been perceived by many as issues primarily for HR. Have you seen a re-examination by leaders of their roles and responsibilities when it comes to mental health? And also, can you share with us a little about leadership success profiles before and during this pandemic?
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, there are a few trends, and Sam, if you can share this slide, thank you. What this pandemic showed from a corporate perspective is it drastically changed the way to work from one day to another. And there was a discussion about, yes, changing the workplace anyway, but the remote work really has accelerated and also caused a lot of challenges, because what we required is a discussion about what are critical skills and roles. So early last year, suddenly people had to come to the office to do what we initially thought is not critical work. But because the work was designed in a way that, for instance, we remember the Hanko issue in Japan, where we had to come to the office to pay our bills. So that's just, from a psychological perspective, people got afraid because they were not safe coming to the office. But in order to keep the lights on as an operation, the processes had to make work. So this whole discussion, what is critical and the critical role, is now on the forefront. And going forward, just the recent research shows that potentially in Japan, about 10% of people will change their jobs or need to change their jobs because going forward, those jobs will disappear. And unfortunately, this will be a high impact on women and people with lesser education. So on the existing stress we already have, this evolution of the workplace will continue. What we also see is from an employer perspective, suddenly the role of an employer has changed and expanded. The organization suddenly has to become a social network, which implicitly was always there, but it had to become much more explicit by providing financial support, by providing physical and mental safety. So that's not always easy because it requires resources and skills, and they were not always there. So how that changed role will continue going forward, that will be a big question to explore. And then because the pandemic hit everyone cold, initially we were just struggling to get over it and make it work. But very early last year, there was a discussion on how do we track productivity? How do we make sure remote work is working? So that stress of being productive remotely added on top of all the other stress we have. And then there are a couple other trends going forward. So on the next slide, I just wanted to point out, Vickie mentioned that the health crisis existed before. Now, if I look at a managerial approach in Japan, very often the way of managing amplifies health issues. Because what we find from a leadership development perspective is that very often in Japan, leaders are very narrow in the way they manage their people. So in this simple model here is, it's 6 leadership styles. But what we see compared to other geographies, that over the lifetime of a leader in Japan, you typically find 2 styles, whereas in many other regions, leaders have up to 5 styles. So now imagine if you continue to have a pace-setting leader who is focusing on execution excellence and his own interest versus a situation where people want to be heard and engaged. So that poses quite a bit of a challenge on how we educate and expand the leadership skills and competencies in order to allow for conversations that are beyond just getting the work done. So that's one of the biggest issues we see. So Sam, if you go to the, not the next, but the after next, yeah. Now what we see, what accelerated from a leadership perspective is that the traditional attributes for leaders, having a vision, having financial acumen, being smart as a knife, having focused drive, are no longer sufficient. Because now we are looking much more for leaders who are the connectors in chief, who have engaging styles, who are authentic, who have this agility and curiosity to engage with people and also provide an environment where people can find a voice, and then have organizations that are much more human-centric. So the pandemic, with all negative, it probably accelerated the discussion towards the future of work.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you, Karen. Next, I'd like to move on to ask Vickie. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned that we're all physical beings, including leaders, and we're all carrying with us the stresses of the last 18 months, both physically and psychologically. Perhaps you could tell us a little more about that, and if you've got any advice for leaders in terms of resilience, how to build up their own and support the resilience of others.
Thank you, Joshua. I think that when we talk about the stress that and the impact of COVID and a disaster, it's happening to everybody, right? It's not just happening to the employees, it's not just happening to somebody else out there, it's happening to the leaders, it's happening to everyone across all platforms, right? So you enter into a phase where you can't have that predictability, where many of the strategies that maybe you were using before, as Karen was mentioning, they're not working for you. And just like everybody else, you're experiencing the same stresses coming at you, but perhaps you've even got more because you've got the responsibility of your employees. And how do you begin to set the mold or set the role model, right? Or set the strategy for how you want to move forward when you're in uncharted waters. And so I think what's really important when you are leaders, that you are in a disaster, that you are honest about what you can and can't do, and that taking care of yourself is going to be really important if you are going to lead your team through, right? So it's not just looking after the well-being of others, you need to understand the impact that these stresses are having on you, right? And all of these stresses and challenges will make us fatigued, will make us tired, and will have physical impacts on our body. And while we are also keen to move forward, what we are all reaching at this point, and many have already reached, is that we are burnt out. Many leaders are burnt out, many employees are burnt out, right? So as we're planning for that future and getting things going again, I think it's also really important to say, we are humans, we are physical beings, this is where we're at, and have those honest conversations with teams. So being more mindful.
Right, and being willing to be honest about your own vulnerabilities. Yeah, very good. Okay, Vickie, if I could stay with you, I'd like to move on to consider how all of this is impacting employees in particular. Perhaps you could share your perspective on that. And I think we have a slide to go with this one.
Yeah, so if I could have the slide up for this. So following on from what I was saying before, I think it's really important that there's a lot of research that's out there, but you look at the timing of the research. So initially, when some of the research was coming out, people were saying that they were really stressed about having to work from home as they had to deal with that adjustment period, right? All of those stresses and those changes, they weren't given a lot of choices in what was going on. But now, 18 months later, many of them are saying, well, I quite like this bit from working from home, a bit working remotely. I don't know that I want to go back into the office 5 days of the week. I don't know that I really wanted to go back how it was before. So while we're madly getting our vaccinations and we're trying to move forward in getting our businesses and our people together, what is that new work environment going to look like, right? I think it's you're feeling it from your employees, and this is an opportunity for us to think about how can we reinvent our work environment? How can we make reform to make our work environment more productive? So the research that I've just got listed here from a recent McKinsey survey from, I think it was March this year, was that so many of the employees were saying that they don't really know what their company is wanting from them as they go back into this post-pandemic period. What is it going to look like? What is the setup that they're going to have? And as I was saying earlier, many are saying that they already feel burnt out. So, you know, we might want to get them back in the office, we might be feeling really keen, but we have to remember that the physical toll of the last 18 months is in us. And it's going to be in us differently for different groups. So if I've been maybe a female and I've been, you know, educating kids at home, or some of the other challenges that I might have been facing, I might be experiencing more. If I've had COVID, I might be experiencing it more, because we know that 1/3 of people who've experienced COVID have ongoing mental health problems. If I lost a family member to COVID, I might be experiencing it more. If I haven't been able to get home, if I'm a foreigner and I haven't been able to get home for the last 18 months or 2 years, I might be feeling things more. So it's not like everybody going back into the office is going to be on the same footing, although we've all experienced this stress over the last 18 months. And I think what's really interesting there is that a number of people are saying, if I'm forced to go back into the office 5 days a week, I'm going to leave. I'm going to look for a company that's going to be more flexible. And although we know there's going to be this increase in mental health issues, what worries me is the McKinsey survey is saying, and it's repeated in lots of other surveys, that people would rather talk to an app or some artificial intelligence rather than a human being about their mental health issue. Yet throughout all of COVID, the one thing that was coming out was how we wanted to connect with each other and we were missing those connections. So we would go to a doctor and we would talk about a physical health problem. When it comes to a mental health problem, we're not talking about it and we feel ashamed. Some other research that I've got here is saying that while many managers dealing with somebody who's got a mental health problem. And as I mentioned before, at least 1 in 5 people prior to COVID had a mental health problem in the workplace. Most of them had not received training and felt uncomfortable or unsure about what was the best way to support an employee who might have had a mental health problem. So we know that we're going to have more mental health problems going forward. We know that many of us are burnt out, yet many of our managers are not feeling equipped in how to deal with that. So I think that's an important consideration when we're thinking about some of the things we need to have in place when we're thinking about going back to work.
That's really fascinating, Vickie. Thank you. So there's a real dichotomy there because many folks have been feeling very isolated, but at the same time, too ashamed to reach out to another person. That's really fascinating. Thank you for those insights. Okay, so let's move on now to think about what might be necessary moving forward. What challenges are we likely to face? So yeah, many organizations have already started to draw up their plans for the new normal. Last month, my organization surveyed 173 employers in Tokyo, and we learned that 75% of those intend to continue flexible work arrangements in one form or another. I'm going back to some of the points that we covered before. As we think about moving forward, what might a successful supportive system to promote everyone's mental health at work look like? Karen, maybe I can go to you next. Please kindly share some of your ideas on moving forward. I think we have a slide here as well.
We have a slide here, yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm coming from the top management leadership perspective. So we need to design and redesign our organizations. So as a top manager, what will be your principle to base your future on work on? So right now, one of the big 4 companies, they have something called flexibility and choice. So they look at what jobs, what roles can be delivered where, and allow people then to make decisions if they want to come back to the office or work from home. So that will really allow companies to build a different employer brand in the market, as well as maybe tease out some of the inefficiencies you might have in your organization. So because most of us are for-profit organizations, so going forward, our design needs to reflect that. But what's definitely becoming a bigger point is to hear your employees much more and give them a way to reflect what they need from the organization. The next, from a leadership perspective, I would say communicate, communicate, communicate. You need to do something, because standing still will not be the solution. But at the same time, we don't have all the solutions yet. So find a principle for the way you want your people to work. If they should come to the office, give them the reason. What I find most interesting working with teams as a coach is, why are we together? What is our big why? Once this is clear, people don't mind to come to the office because they know they have a good reason. And then take this as an opportunity to create and shape your culture actively. So this is a wonderful point in time to actually rethink what your values are as an organization and how you want them expressed, and design the setup and the training for your people around it. And develop leaders which are much more versatile, more flexibility in accepting different opinions, becoming a little bit more emotional intelligence. And last but not least, the team focus is so important, because as we said earlier, a single person cannot solve the problems anymore. We need teams. And now is the moment that teams can actually be the way of working. And then last but not least, from a manager perspective, sometimes we forget to ask what everyone needs. Again, very interesting working with managers from a coach perspective. Very often there are assumptions made about what people need, instead of actually going out and ask them, what infrastructure do you need to get the work done? What other support do we need to provide you? And that's individual. So that's the other thing where companies need to balance when to create a policy versus when to provide something on an individual basis to make work viable for them. Because people with families at home have very different requirements from single working folks. And then maybe we can go back to ideas on how we want our career discussions, what kind of careers we want. For a while there were ideas of dialing up and down in your career, and that would be a wonderful point in time to take these proven approaches back to the workplace. So addressing basic needs and being able to have that conversation is a very practical thing. And then aligning the expectations for work and for careers, again, would be my other suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, very good points there about the importance of purpose. It's really connecting with me. Great, okay. And Vickie, I'd like to ask you as well to share your thoughts on how we can gear our organizations well for the times ahead. In particular, I was hoping that you could tell us more about employee assistance programs, or EAPs. It's something that I didn't really know about myself until a couple of years ago. My organization, we surveyed employers around the world recently, and we found that in Japan, only 21% of respondents actually have an EAP, compared to about 52% of those that responded to us elsewhere. So yeah, it would be great if you could share a bit about that too.
Yeah, I've got a slide that's talking about all of those things. Do we want to put that one up now? Yeah, okay, right. So yes, thank you. So I think Karen mentioned some really good points there about having communication. And I think it's also really critical at this point to think, well, I don't have to decide that this is what back to work is going to look like permanently, right? I think we're in a period of recovery from COVID. And I think we need to take it in stages. And also, I think it's really important to have those discussions with our employees and our teams to ask them, what do you want? Because we didn't get a say in what was happening to us when COVID changed everything. So having some dialogue now as we plan for going forward is going to be really important. And there are lots of different ways that you can make it feel like it's okay to have these discussions about talking about stress, because we know we weren't very good about that beforehand, and we know it was a huge problem in Japan. So we can be, and we've all felt the stress of COVID, so perhaps we can be a bit more honest about that. We can talk about the mental health issues. We can do training for the managers that are not getting it. And I think, you know, making it acceptable if your company has support programs, like Joshua was saying about employee assisted programs, make it acceptable for someone to go and access those without feeling like it's a sense of failure. I think I mentioned before that we would readily go to a doctor for a physical health problem. We'd even go to a physio or chiropractor for a back or a muscle problems. So why can't we go and get some support for something that's happening in our mind? Because it's clearly an issue out there. It's one of the leading health issues, and it's going to be increasing over the next 1 to 2 years as we come out of this post-COVID phase.
That's great. Thank you, Vickie. So I kind of have a follow-up question related to EAPs and the point that you made earlier about how, because people feel quite isolated and quite anxious about reaching out to another person, how do you have any recommendations for how an organization can structure the access to its employee assistance program to sort of make that first step as easy or as comfortable as possible, so that people don't sort of succumb to those hesitations and anxieties about reaching out?
And so I think that's where it's really important that your company, right, sets the scene and says, you know, it's coming from managers and higher up saying, you know, we've all experienced stress, we've all experienced, we can all experience mental health issues, and having that dialogue that it is no different from a physical health issue. So that if you feel that it's acceptable, if you feel that it's not going to affect or impact your career because you've gone and got some mental health support, you're going to be more readily to take access to those services, right? Just like you would with your other health coverage, right? So it's got to come from the company and within feeling safe to talk about these issues. And the easiest way that I think that a company can start to talk about that is talking about stress. And then from stress, we can go into other mental health issues. And that it's, you know, if 1 in 4 of us are going to get a mental health issue in our lifetime, then it's either one of us or one of our family members is likely to experience it. So let's support it, right? Let's make it easier. Let's make it, you know, a service that's supportive rather than shameful.
Great points. Yeah, I know in our business we have support from TELL Japan, so from your organization with our EAP. So, you know, we've tried to have more of an open dialogue with leaders expressing their vulnerabilities and, you know, humanity to everybody. But also, I think, at least in our case, when it comes to sort of the provision of counseling services, we can do that with confidence because we have the support of an organization like TELL, who are providing those counseling services in an anonymous and safe and accessible format to our employees. And they can rest assured knowing that, you know, any member of leadership doesn't necessarily know about the details of their counseling, and that it is anonymous and that they can have confidence in the system.
Correct. I think that's really important. So sometimes, you know, a company can set it up and it's a person down the corner that you can call, or a, you know, a phone number up there that you can ring. It doesn't feel like it's safe or it's an appropriate environment in which to talk about these personal things. It does need to be removed, and you do need to feel safe to talk about it, because we've already got, and the stigma is not just in Japan, it's global. But the stigma in Japan is a lot greater than many other parts of the world.
Right. Yes, indeed. Okay, great. Thank you both so much. This has been really, really interesting so far, and we've got another 20 minutes left. We are getting closer to audience questions. So please do put forward any questions that you may have in the Q&A function, and we'll get to some of those shortly. I wanted to kick off questions now with a question of mine to Karen. So Karen, I wanted to ask you about employer value proposition. So I think recently quite a lot has been made of employer value proposition in relation to organizations' stance on ESG or on equality, diversity, and inclusion. We're at the end of Pride Month, for example. But my organization, we recently surveyed nearly 700 employees in Japan, and we found that around a fifth are quite keen to know that their business, their future business, does have some mental health support services on offer. And so it seems to me, and I'm wondering if you have some answers on this, do you think that this is something that job seekers will be looking for more information about what their employers can offer in the future?
Thank you, Josh. I think it will be part of the overall employee package, how the employee will be perceived by potential employees or other stakeholders in our ecosystem. And there will always be some organizations at the forefront offering this as part of the experience and the support. I could imagine even as part of training, development, well-being in the context of belonging, that kind of thing. And then sooner or later, that will be more mainstream. So what we need is organizations that start offering it in order to make it normal. And the organization is definitely on the forefront doing that. Yeah,
very good, great. I've got a question here from Tove Kinoka for Vickie. So Tove asks, Vickie, you talked about how many people experience PTSD as a result of disaster. And Tove is wondering how drawn out is the nature of the pandemic impact? Could you perhaps help us out with that one?
As in, how long?
So, yeah, how long do you anticipate the impact to be?
Right. So this bit's a little bit tricky because at the moment I think we're in a race against the vaccinating people and the new strains that are out, right? So at the moment we're hoping that we're going to get people vaccinated, and the majority of people are going to be vaccinated within the next 6 months, and you know, we can resume a way of life that maybe we had before. But if we don't succeed in getting enough people vaccinated and we have more of these variants and they become resistant to some of the vaccines, that's not going to be really good for any of us, right? So at the moment, if we're going on this model that we hope to be out of it and vaccinated and successful in the next 6 months, then typically following any disaster, it's the period of 12 months to 2 years, right? That period of change and the period of feeling certain about the future again. So at the moment, that's what we've lost. We've lost security in the future, right? And it's 12 months to 2 years.
Tove, does that more or less answer your question? Tove has just written in the chat here, question is about how the nature of this very prolonged disaster impacts how people experience and deal with PTSD.
Not everyone will get PTSD, right? I think that's really important to remember, right? We are all experiencing what's called a traumatic stress response, but not all of us will go on and have post-traumatic stress. Only around 15 to 20% of us. And that is going to be those that I was saying before that will be more vulnerable, more lack of resources. Maybe they had more losses. Maybe they've lost their jobs. Maybe they lost loved ones. Lots of other demographics that could make them more vulnerable. But around 15 to 20% of them will go on and have PTSD. And I can't predict all of those people at the moment, but we do know that that's going to happen, right? So is that answering the question? I'm not quite sure.
Perhaps Tove can follow up with you separately if there is a follow-up question. I'll move on to another question now from Keith Thomas. So Keith asks, are there any labor laws that need to be considered here in Japan when determining if employees should be coming back to work in the office or continuing to work from home? Or is it the case that companies are free to determine, their policies in this respect? do either of
I'm
you
not
want to
an
jump in?
expert.
Yes, Vickie,
Maybe
yeah.
I can answer this one. I'm not an expert in the labour laws for where your location needs to be. I don't think that that is such a case, right? But I do know that there is a law that says that the company should be having, I think is a 2% or what their disability, people with disabilities, that mental health is included in that, and they must include a percentage of the larger companies must look like in their diversity program that they are encompassing mental health issues and addressing them.
Okay, next question is from David Bickle. So he says, with expectation that less time will be spent physically together with team members in the office, and that some office-based culture, corporate customs and rituals will disappear, how can leaders prevent erosion of corporate identity and culture going forward? Very good question. Karen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah, just looking at recent research and ways of frameworks and approaches to design our operations and consequently our work steps, processes, and activities, it becomes apparent that we have an opportunity to really dismantle the way we work and look at activities level that allow us to relocate the place of work. So we will have work, meaning certain activities like brainstorming, certain decision-making, strategy sessions, that will still be in a physical face-to-face environment. And the reason being is because it's easier for us to work in that closeness, to come up with these kind of outcomes. So by delineating what we want to do in a physical face-to-face environment versus what's okay to do remote, we can deliberately design a corporate identity and a culture. So I think it's actually an amazing opportunity to shape a culture by bringing people together for very focused and let's say more insightful way of working together when you actually come to the office.
Very good. Thank you, Karen. I've got another couple of questions here that kind of intersect with each other, so I'll combine them together. So I have a question from Sanjay Sharma, who asks, does the panel have practical examples of how companies are helping employees through coaching, counseling, etc.? And are companies willing to invest large amounts of money in mental health support? And then the secondary question here that I think does overlap with this one is an anonymous questioner who asks, in my workplace, there is an industrial doctor. However, basically this person's only function seems to be to sign people off work. What do the panelists recommend that companies adopt as best practice? An internal employee counselor, for example, or somebody out external. Maybe Vickie?
Okay, maybe I could start with this. So over the last, one of the question within that question was, what are some examples of companies and what are they doing? And so last year and this year, TELL has been delivering, I don't know, maybe 50 to 60 odd workshops to companies, top tier companies all the way down to smaller innovative companies about stress and what was going on with the pandemic and why from working from home to what it might be like coming back into the workplace. So helping their employees understand that and giving them a range of strategies to cope with the stress and the anxieties and worries about it. In addition to that, we've also been giving workshops on helping managers and also within the education system, helping leaders be mindful of what mental health issues might be occurring within their companies, how to spot them, how to develop strategies to support them, and what is going to be needed for managers. And then we've also been training managers in how to have those conversations, and what services, and connect them to services within their company. The number of EAPs that we have signed in the last 12 months is just ballooned, right? And I think looking at the research that that I was putting up, that's out there, that it says that, you know, people are embarrassed about talking about this topic. We know they have mental health issues. We know that they're not accessing a lot of the services. I think that makes it even more critical that having something in-house where, you know, as I was saying before, they're probably less likely to go to them unless it's more physical nature. Something of that psychological nature, I think it's better to have some distance where they can feel safe about it.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Vickie. So there's so many questions to choose from here. I'm trying not to overlook anybody and take them in order. Heather McLeish asks, what should individuals do to support their own mental health? So taking that responsibility on ourselves, what can we do proactively to support our own mental health? Are there some practical tips that you'd like to share with us, particularly if we can't get support from our workplace? Karen?
Yes, love to. This notion of self-care, it's becoming really, really important. And self-care is nothing selfish. It's really more about honoring yourself and giving yourself time and space to calm down, to relax, with the purpose to be at your best when you go out and work and deliver and interact. So changing your mindset a little bit of, I have to give to others all the time, that you give yourself the permission to give yourself some time and give yourself a room to breathe. And it's very hard because we are so tight with and back-to-back meetings and stuff. So being much more deliberate in blocking time for yourself, where you just take a walk, meditate for a few minutes, or treat yourself, that can give you much more energy and relaxes you so that you will be better when you go back to the others. That would be my top of the mind thing to do.
I love that, Karen. I completely agree wholeheartedly. I've never had a problem giving myself a bit of self-care by going for a walk or getting a good night's sleep. And I definitely agree that it's actually a way to give back to other people because they will receive a better version of yourself as a result. That's great. Okay, wonderful. Well, we are very close to approaching the end of our hour here. And I did want to give each of our speakers an opportunity just to share with us one or two of the things that they would most like for us to take away from today's session. And if there are any asks of us, BCCJ members, participants in today's sessions as well, perhaps I could go to Karen first. Karen, are there one or two things that you would like for us to take away from today's session?
Despite the fact that COVID is a tremendous stress and put so much and just disrupted our whole lives and everything, I would also like and encourage everyone to see this as an opportunity to change things and not to stop and just dream that we will go back to the old days. It's really right now a point where we can make things different. And because we have these cracks now in the system, we can use this. So I would like to encourage everyone to build a better workplace going forward, to build a better version of him or herself. And yes, use this experience as a learning instead of something that makes me miserable. So that's just my never-ending optimism. So I would love everyone to have that a little bit more. Thank you.
I love that. Hear, hear. Vickie, one or two takeaways that you'd like for us to really go away with front of mind, and any asks of the organization as well?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit more pessimistic because that's what I what I'm seeing. You know, I've been talking about the burnout that's coming for a long time, and it's here now. And we saw 1,000 more people take their lives last year, and already this year the suicide numbers are up. So mental health is real, the stress is real, and hopefully the pandemic has made us all appreciate that we all have mental health, right? And maybe it can make us more mindful about addressing it. And I'm hopeful that because we've all experienced it, maybe we can have some real discussions going forward, because I think we are at a crossroad for thinking about what is the future of work going to be, because the way we were doing it before was not helping anybody's mental health. So can we think about doing this differently? Can we rethink mental health, right? So that we can be this creative, prosperous, motivating creatures that humans can be. And maybe if I had an ask, my ask would be that we have a Step Up Challenge coming this September for World Suicide Prevention Day, between World Suicide Prevention Day and World Mental Health Day. And it's about taking 21,169 steps, one step for every life that was lost to suicide last year, and creating some hope through that action. So this is a great way for companies to do something physical and mark these important dates.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vickie. I'll just add very briefly my own sort of one single key takeaway. It's something that Karen said. She told us that our organizations have got to become real world social networks, and that as leaders, we've got to be connectors in chief at the heart of human-centric organizations. That's really stuck with me as an image. And my own ask would be to sort of back up what Vickie had to say. I think, you know, look out for these opportunities to get involved with TELL Japan. I think it's a fantastic organization that's really giving back to the global community here. So there's the Step Up Challenge, and I think there'll be opportunities as well for you to donate to TELL Japan as well individually. So yeah, that's everything from me. Thank you so much to our panelists and to the BCCJ. I think I'll hand over to Laurie. Thank you very much.
Amazing content. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Vickie, and thank you, Karen. I mean, it's been such a thought-provoking hour, and it's almost impossible, I think, for me to dive in at the end here and give a 90-second summary of all the amazing content that's been covered. But rest assured that anyone on the call will receive a follow-up document from the BCCJ over the next few days, connecting you to our speakers and some of the resources that they've mentioned. Just as way of a reminder, I know that we're at the hour now, the BCCJ's Future of Work series has been put together by the team as a way to focus on post-pandemic recovery and the wellness of people and places. So if you or any of your colleagues have suggestions for what we should be including in this series, then do let us know. We take all of your suggestions to heart. And actually, we've named this the Future of Work, but I think in the past hour, I've been rethinking, wondering if we should call this the Future of Wellness and Wellbeing, because actually everything we do at work depends on how we're feeling as an individual and how well we're feeling as a person, as a human being, not just as a human doing. As we enter the workforce on a day-to-day. So yeah, stay tuned. The series is evolving, our day-to-day lives are evolving, our workplaces are evolving, and our speakers today, I hope you'll agree, have really ushered us into this big topic in a very, very meaningful way. So thank you, Vickie, thank you, Karen, thank you, Josh, and thanks everyone on the call for your precious time. Let's stay in touch and be well. Thank you.